Ahead and get started. This is a work session on 2022 fund balance, and we will start with introductions.
Kevin Cross.
Anna Brawley.
Exalatal.
Daniel Voland.
And on the phone, do we have Mr. Martinez?
Yes, thank you, Chair.
Okay, Mr. Rivera. Mr. Johnson?
Here.
Okay, I believe Mr. Rivera is around. So we will kick this off with Mr. Thurn to walk us through the handout. The handout is also up on the work sessions page for those of you online, and this was distributed, a couple weeks back by Desiree Camacho, our budget analyst. All right, Mr. Thurn.
Good afternoon. For those of you who haven't been through this process, including myself, fund balance is always a very important document, and we'll start off by just apologizing with how late we are this year for getting that information out with all of the struggles that we've had in the accounting department. But we always try to use actuals wherever possible to make sure that we're giving the most accurate information at the time rather than forecasting or guessing, especially on fund balance, which is something so important. So in speaking with the chair and Ms. Brawley during the, I think it was the Budget and Finance Committee meeting, we wanted to kind of give a good idea in advance of the upcoming budget discussions about where we ended up on 2022 for fund balance. So we put together, this is just really at a high summary level. There are a tremendous number of spreadsheets and backup things, but for purposes of just going through it on a high level to be able to see where we ended up and so forth, we put together this quick summary here. And then more importantly, I think, is also trying to provide some context for the prior 5 or 6 years so you can kind of see how our trends have been going and where we're at currently through the process. So that's really what you have in front of you, and I'm going to kind of just go through it in a couple of different sections here. It's kind of doing the same thing twice, but in 2 different ways, and the whole point is that the end result is identical. So we'll kind of do that. So I'm going to kind of start at the top part, which is the fund balance calculation, and really fund balance is what did you have the prior year? What was your ending fund balance? And then how did you do the current year? How'd your revenues do compared to your expenditures? If you have more revenues than expenditures, then you have a positive number and you add that to what you started with and you have your ending number. If you have a negative balance, then it takes down from what you started with. So that's the high level logic of how fund balance works and so forth. So you can kind of see here that from a historical perspective, we've gone from, around the 60s in the first 3 years of the thing. We had a high of almost 100 million, and then we were down to 11, and then and this analysis was done in September. So we just actually closed all of 22 last Thursday. I'm not anticipating any significant changes in these numbers, but we needed to get it out a while back. So that's why it still says preliminary. We will finalize it when we have audited numbers, which we are hoping will be in November with a November date. So we're pushing pretty hard to that. But in kind of looking at the high level picture here, which is really just the first 5 or 6 rows there, I'll start with 21. We ended the year with $11 million in actual fund balance, 11.6. We believe when this analysis was done, we have a positive 35 million for 2022. So then the ending fund balance is going to be approximately 47 million. So that's an inclusive number that encapsulates a lot of things, and that's what the next part, the rest of the spreadsheet is really going to do. But that's our first check and balance. That's the high level. What did you start with? Did you make money or lose money during the year? What are you going to end with? And so our targeted number, doing it that way, is that 46,859 number, doing it at the very, very high level. Now, with that being said, it's actually composed of a lot of different pieces, and that's what the next 2/3 of this page is going to kind of hopefully highlight for you to give you an idea of what those individual pieces are that are going there. So Most of you, if not all, have heard the 10 and 2 requirement. That's an actual requirement mainly in for our bond rating to maintain a good bond rating so that when we sell our bonds, we've got enough in savings that we can pretty much assure the bond buyers out there that we will eventually pay. It's kind of like having that savings account to ensure that we have enough to be able to cover that. So it's a very important criteria for us, and we need to have that. So those percentages of 10 and 2 are kind of a macro level. It actually is a slightly different percentage for every different service area and so forth, but we use 10 and 2 as kind of the nomenclature. But in the actual numbers that go in there, there's some 11s and some 8s, and it kind of averages out to the numbers that we have there. Those numbers are taken on a percentage of our totals to be able to do that. So that's where we come up with for the current year. If we were to meet our 10 and 2 requirement, we'd need $59.1 million in fund balance just to meet the set aside that we would have to meet our 10 and 2 requirement. So that's kind of your starting number of what we would like to have as our bare minimum, or what we're actually obligated to have according to the statutes and codes that we have in place. Now, our actual fund balance are the next columns that come down here. I did break out this year in talking with the chairperson. I really want people to start seeing the building safety fund and what's happening to that over a period of time here, because it's kind of been combined with everything that's been happening with COVID and everything that's been happening with earthquake. As you're all aware, we took a lot of money out of our savings to handle those particular emergencies, and it kind of skewed our fund balance for the most current years. But also skewed in there, which you don't really see, is what's going on in the building safety area as well, and the growth that has happened since 2017 in that particular number. So we have listed the building safety for reference purposes as a separate line there, and you can see those are the ones that go from -4.8 to -14 million, and you can see how that's grown. But that is a actual negative fund balance that affects our fund balance as a whole. And then we grouped all the other funds together that are out there, and that's currently at a -16.7 million. So when you're looking at the current shortfall that we currently have is $31 million. And I think you've been hearing me say that I'm pretty confident that 2022 was going to be a negative fund balance year, and we're still there. And I'm going to go through the spreadsheet, then I'll kind of come back and hit why the numbers are looking the way they are and so forth. But I kind of want to go through it. So basically, we're required to have 59.1 million to meet our 10 and 2. We're at all of our other fund balance numbers are a -31 million. So our actual fund balance is 28 million, a little over 28 million for the end of 22. The next row shows what that percentage is. Now, obviously, we would love that number to be 12, because that's the number, that's the bare minimum. Anything over 12 is technically a surplus. Anything under that is really meaning that we're not meeting our 10 and 2 requirement. You then add back all of the encumbered fund balance categories that we have down there that total 18.7 million. And when you take the 28 that we have plus the 18.7 that is in the encumbered, which you cannot touch for any other purposes, they're in there for a reason. You add those together, you get the 46.8. That matches the top number at doing at the macro level, where you're taking the prior years and compared to what your revenues versus expenditures were for the year. That's our check and balance, so to speak. So it's kind of done two different ways. I don't want people to just continue to add them all the way down, but it's two different ways to make sure we're getting to the exact same number that we're doing there. Now, from a little context in history here, you can see last year we were significantly negative. We were 71 million negative in the and that really is a direct result of the fact of the way we had to account for the vast majority of the COVID expenditures, that of when we spent the money versus when it was encumbered versus when we received it. and we had to make some significant adjustments from BDO's requirements last year. And you can see how the impact that had on our fund balance last year. We were technically borrowing against, we were actually negative last year because we only had 11.6 million total, but 22 of that was already was encumbered. So we were borrowing against something we didn't even have last year as we were going through this. Now, the good news is, as you're well aware from all of the FEMA reports, we've had a huge year in getting FEMA reimbursements back for COVID. Approximately 77 million has come back. Now, because of the accounting rules as well, some of that money can be attributed to 2022, and some of it's going to be attributed to 2023 based upon the way that we have to do it. The significant amount that you can see that we've gone from a negative 57 to a negative 16 is because of that 77 million, we've been able to bring back 40 million of that and apply it to 2022's type expenditures. And we're hoping then that we can bring back the balance of that revenue that we got this year in 23 will actually show up in 23's calculations at the end of the year when we're finally done and audited at that point in time. I do feel, we haven't closed any months of 23. So there are no actuals for 23 as of this point. And there's things that go up and down. So I'm not projecting how we've done across the municipality as a whole. And we'll have to work through those as we go. But I do want you to know that I do feel comfortable that the 5.5% is definitely going to be significantly higher for 23 because we know that FEMA COVID reimbursement 23 applicable revenue that we can finally post here is going to show up in 23 when we actually are able to get to that. So I think you've seen here, we've gone down quite a bit. We are on our way back. I think it's going to take a 2-year requirement to get back, but we've gone from a negative 1.9 to a positive 5.5, which is a good increase or improvement. I get the question asked all the time, our bond rating has been decreased each of the last 2 years because of what's going on here. They're like, oh, well, are we gonna get our bond rating to go back up again? My guess is it's not right away. I mean, we haven't gotten back to our 10 and 2, so I think that's going to bring the bond rating agencies some apprehension. It's taken us a long time to get our financials done. That's going to bring some apprehension in when they're reviewing it. But they also not only give a rating, but they give like a wording that goes beyond it that says, are you heading negative or you're heading positive, even though the rating is separate. And a couple of them, they gave us a rating and they were like neutral or maybe downward. We might be able to switch that to, hey, they're looking like they're on their way up. But I don't believe we're going to get an immediate bond change. Now, the good news is we didn't sell, nor do we plan on selling any bonds this year. So or issue bonds, I guess would be the appropriate terminology. So we haven't had to have that question or that answer with them. But the bond rating agencies do, on an annual basis, kind of start asking questions. Even though we're not selling, they might come back. But I would not expect, at least an initial term, just because we are now on the right path to getting all that money back, that they're going to immediately change the bond rating for us. So I'll just kind of go to the second page real quick. We just wanted to graphically show it. It's the same numbers that are on the prior page, but the blue blocks and the one orange block, which is the negative, shows what our actual 10 and 2 fund balance numbers were, which do not include the encumbered amounts. And what the red line is the minimum threshold that we're supposed to be at in order to meet that particular requirement. And you can see it's for trends here. And I think everyone knows why. And don't forget, earthquake was a part of this as well. May not have been 126 million, but it's in the $30 million range. And all that money came from fund balance to begin with. And we still have not gotten all that money back. So that's having a negative impact on our fund balance as well. I would say we are almost all the way back on COVID. I've got about 4 million left out of the 126. So we're pretty close to that, but we've got way more than 4 million left to go on earthquakes. So until that money actually comes back in the door, we've been spending money on those projects, and that's negatively impacting our fund balance, which is going to be in that other funds category that we have here. That's an impact. And we won't get that money back until those projects are completely finished off and built. One example is the new Eagle River Fire Station out there. That's our one of our big projects. That's a $2 or $3 million, and we're going to be spending money, and we're not going to get any money back on that for quite some time. So that's having some negative impacts on our fund balance, and it might be a couple of years before we get that particular money back. So the goal here was to kind of show the historically how the numbers have been, why they've gone down. I think everybody is aware of that. And on the other side, we've turned the corner, and we're coming back up again. However, 22, because of the way accounting and how we can account for all the money, it's still going to have this negative, but we're on that positive uptick to be able to do that. And then, as I'll just state one last time, I am hoping that we can begin to maybe have some conversations about the building safety category. I know there was a very extensive analysis in 2018. I'm currently reading, it's 81 pages. I think only 3 out of the last 18 years has that shown a surplus versus a negative. However, I don't know if everyone's is aware of how large the negatives are getting and how quickly they are getting, and that we're now at 14 million. And by the way, this is 22. I would be almost assured to say that given what the history is, 23 is probably going to be a bigger number than 22 is, because it seems to be growing as we go through there. So that's just something to take into consideration. But I did specifically want to break it out so we can be aware of it and know that I can get all the money back in the world for COVID and earthquake. That's not going to do anything to address that particular line item going forward. And as long as that's running a negative, you would have to have positives in other funds in order to be able to offset that difference.
Okay, great. Thank you. I want to note for the record, we were joined by Mr. Solt at the beginning of the work session right after we got started, and Ms. Bronga at 12:53. Before we turn away from the last point, Anna and I, or Ms. Brawley and I, will commit to making some room in the Budget and Finance Committee to talk about the building safety fund, particularly before first quarter, where we will be discussing taxes and possible tax levies and the mill rate. So with that, I'll turn to the queue. If you're on the phone, you can text me to get in the queue. If you're in the room, wave. All right, Ms. Brawley.
Yeah, thank you. I have, I guess, several questions, but I'll just do a couple right now. First, can you, just for clarification, it's 10% and 2% of what? Is it our annual operating budget, or what is that calculated from?
From the budget.
And so the general operating budget. So of whatever we spend, the almost 600 million, that's what this is calculated on.
And you'll notice that, it's 530 million, but like I said, the percentages are, different because we call it 10%, but they're not all 10%. There's like 20 different service areas that all have different percentages that add up to the number. So the number is based on the actual, even though the category kind of says 10%, because that's the category that it falls in.
And then the building safety, I know we're going to talk about it in more detail in the future as well, but that is from, I guess, how does money get into that fund? Is that from permits?
From the reading that I've been doing over the last few days to try to educate myself on that particular area, and Kent may have much more information on that than I do, but it's permits, inspections, all of the residential, commercial revenues that are generated by that particular department compared to the expenditures, which I would assume mostly would be labor for that particular requirement. There were, from what I've read, there were substantial changes to the way the revenues came in 2009. where they switched. And prior to that year, prior to 2009, it was self-sufficient. Let's just use that as a terminology. Then for whatever reasons, I'm not questioning the reasons, they were changed at that point. And then they were even further changed in future years. I know some of the inspection and permit fees went from like $150 to $75, and that next wave had an additional impact at that particular point. But historically, what made this positive was the commercial, new development commercial, which was based on a percentage of the development. And that was a cash cow compared to all of the other categories. And when they went away from that particular type of methodology in 2009, this trend started at that point in time. And my guess is also there's probably a lot less commercial development in more recent years, because you have plenty of, and there's no strip malls going up and office space, and so forth. So that place where that revenue used to come from is probably even less because of the maturity of the market for those particular type things. And as a result, we're running in these kind of things. As a small subsection of that, there's also the dynamic of the Anchorage requirements for building codes and the Eagle River and Girdwood, and those generate different revenues as well. So a house being built in Eagle River doesn't necessarily bring the same revenue as a house being built in Anchorage. So those have had some impacts. That's not from my knowledge. That's from me reading this extensive analysis that was done in 2018, as they were starting to see that over a 15-year period, only 3 years was a positive. What I don't think people maybe were expecting was this significant increase recently. I think it's maybe it's grown recently, and is having a much more significant impact on our fund balances.
Thank you. And I know that's a topic we'll come back to. I guess I'll just briefly observe, this seems to be built on the assumption that we're exacting that public benefit from development, and we've just not been developing, whether it's housing or, like you said, commercial, for many years. So that seems to be part of it. And then also just to say, one action we could take is to simply make this whole and figure out how to do that. I think the real thing that we need to do eventually is dig into this, understand it, and really question whether this is the way that we should keep doing it. And so again, we'll come back to that, but I just wanted to mention that now. Thanks.
And it was not my intention to have that conversation here. My only intention here was to separate it so it can be visible for opportunity of discussion.
Appreciate it. Mr. Cross.
Thank you. Does this take into calculation, or have we, do we know where we stand regarding Medicaid reimbursements for public safety ambulance? How does that factor in? If I recall, those funds for 2022 were coming in late 23, and those were hard to be calculated.
Boy, that's a very good question through the chair, Mr. Cross. I can tell you this year's ones are based upon having to have 2022's financials already finished, and we're not finished. And so Chief Schrage been able to get the state to allow us to the end of the year to do that. So I do believe we are gonna get our money. However, I believe he said it's 3/4, or it's running 3/4 after that before the actual money comes in. So you're looking end of 23 before the money for the 22 year will actually be here. So it technically it is a revenue and it should come in, but because we're late, I think what's happening is that particular revenue might be shifting in years of when the revenue actually comes in, that we actually can reflect it in our financials versus the year that those expenditures happened.
Is there two questions? One, is there a timeline where we will work too late and lose the opportunity to get reimbursed?
We were worried about that. Yeah, I mean, Chief Schrage has asked for 4 extensions, I believe. They've just given us an extension to the end of the year. We believe we will have our financials done with a November date. So we believe that we will be able to meet that deadline requirement. So we will not be missing out on that significant amount of money, which has been 18 to $20 million.
And that was my next question, my final question, which was, do we have any early estimates of what we expect that?
I haven't looked at it. That's just the historical amount. I would imagine it's going to be something similar to that in that process, but the chief might know more about that.
So we covered this at the Budget and Finance Committee meeting, and I followed up with Mr. Cipriano. I mean, we've posted 18 million in SEMT reimbursement this year into SAP.
But that wouldn't have been for 22.
22.
That probably would have been
Right,
for
for 23. So we've posted 23 money already in from SEMT.
But the year that money came from would have been a prior period. If it
But for
takes,
purposes of budgeting, and when we're kind of considering the budget holistically, it's the year it comes in, right? Not the year it was billed.
correct.
Okay, just
And-
like
and-
FEMA reimbursement, it's we are able to, we accept it in the year it comes in, and that's the year it's on our books, and that's the year.
But
we're
my
doing
worry
it.
is because we are so late on this one, which is the 23's numbers. I mean, they're saying roughly 3/4. If it slides a little bit, it might be, we might not get, because normally we do our financials, let's say in August, September, there might be a fairly high confidence that we're going to get that money next year. I'm a little bit worried that if we don't give them the information until December to the state, if there's a chance it might not hit next year because it's so late, and it might hit the first part of the following year. So I don't know how. I'm just trying to tell you we are late, but it does take a significant amount of time before that comes in. But the bigger question to me is, are we going to lose out on that money? And I'm feeling much more confident now that the chief was able to get the state to give an extension to the end of the year. I feel very confident that we will be able to have our ACFR done so he can submit that and not lose out on that reimbursement.
Other questions? I do have a question on the 16,767,000 and a few other dollars, the other funds. Is there some, is that about 4 million we're waiting on FEMA reimbursement rolled into that? And any of the outstanding FEMA reimbursement related to COVID, a portion of that 16 million?
I think it's a combination of a variety of things. I think there's a significant number, maybe $30 million in COVID for I don't know the exact number, in 2023 that has not been realized that will be in 2023. So it's more than 16 million in COVID that we've got in that is going to be 23 related when we actually get it.
Okay, maybe I asked an inartful question, but if we're concerned that we had a other funds shortfall of $16.7 million, I guess what I'm trying to figure out is what makes up the $16.7 million, and are there things that are coming in, even though they're in the following year of 23, that are taking care of and reducing that number?
There are a variety of things, and the COVID, earthquake, as I mentioned, is absolutely there. I mean, if I had to take a guess, 8 to 10 million is probably as a result of earthquake projects that are out there that we haven't been reimbursed for at this particular point in time. I'm trying to think of other things that might be there, but yeah, there are other things other than COVID that make up that particular item.
Okay. And the reason for the question is, I think the Building Safety Service Fund, we can set that aside for another day, and we've made some policy choices around that. But when we're thinking about building the budget for 24 and, cost we may be needing to consider, or holes in the budget that we may be becoming aware of because of a negative balance, what we need to know is, are we also expecting reimbursement for those things? And I think that's where that's wanting to break down that $16 million figure, like how much of it are we expecting revenues to come in or be posted to from 23?
I'm expecting, actually, because of COVID, around that $30 million, because remember, COVID is going to help offset, because we've had this building service thing always in the underlying thing, and we've had other things that have been positive enough to offset that negative. I think I think we've got 30 million coming in because of COVID, which gets us, when you add that, the 16 and the 14, we'll get to practically zero, which will get us close to our 12.
Great. That's what I was getting at. So we don't really need to be looking for room in the budget to accommodate this fund balance situation for 22 today, or in, as we move to the 24 budget. And then as we move into 1Q and we get kind of some of those more refined numbers, we can take another look.
And I think this goes back to what I was saying. I feel confident that what we've got in 23 coming in through COVID is going to be enough increase to get us back pretty close to our 12% type thing. But that gets us back to zero. And you're saying, well, that's a lot more for COVID than but it's offsetting the 14 million that's out there for the other one. But
Yep. Got it. And yeah, because we were doing this review right now in the context of working on next year's budget. Ms. Brawley.
Yeah, thank you. And I think it's continuing on that line of thinking. So what then is the Muni's savings goals? So, because what I'm hearing is, so setting aside the building services piece, that's its own mess to figure out. Most of our spend down of our savings essentially was dealing with emergencies, with the expectation that we would get reimbursed at some point. So, we're basically showing that there is no available fund balance to reallocate if you're saying that we can't go past that 10 and 2. And in fact, I think it's still showing that we would be short of it based on what I'm looking at, our actual ending of 46 versus needing that 59. Is that accurate?
The actual number is 28 compared to what we need of 59, because the 18.7 is encumbered. You can't touch that. The 46 includes the 18. So the apples to apples comparison is we need 59, we have 28. So we're that 31 million short to meet our 10 and 2. I feel that when 23 comes in, the COVID monies that we got will be that a number to get us back to our 10 and 2 requirement at zero, being able to, I guess.
Okay.
But the 59 is the 28, not the 46, because you can't touch the 18.7.
Okay. Yeah. And thank you for clarifying that. So I guess I'm still struggling with the fact that, like we said, there's projects that are still outstanding. There's the COVID money coming back, which is basically money that was already spent out of our savings that we're putting back. But beyond that, maybe I'm just having trouble articulating the exact question, but I'm having trouble understanding then again what our general savings goals is, with the idea that when we have emergencies, that's why we dipped into this in the first place. But then we're also significantly underspending government, right? And so in theory, it's money that was allocated or was appropriated through the budget for general government expenditures, but for various reasons, we're not meeting that because of vacancies or whatever else, right? That we're not. We're in the opposite problem of overspending. And so there's a lot of needs that aren't getting met. And so I know typically in this situation, or maybe in past years anyway, part of the choices of the budget is how do we spend fund balance, or how do we have extra, maybe one-time money to put towards some things that we need, whether it's a grant or a service or whatever. And it seems like we're basically not allowing ourselves to ever do that because we're always having to hold out for that reimbursement that we're going to get years from now.
Well, I would look at it's about in the middle of the column, which is the total fund balance, surplus, and shortfall number. I mean, you can see in 2017, we had $7 million. So that was in excess of what we needed for our 10 and 2. So I would say I don't want to say it, that's extra money. We should have a minimum threshold, which we do because it's in code, of we should have 10 and 2. Your question, I think, goes to how much that's a mandatory requirement. How much above that is good to have and not touch in case we do have an emergency to try to keep our 10 and 2, versus how much do you have that money to use for other purposes? And I don't know if that's a decision for me to weigh in on, but I understand where you're coming from. If you're just having 10 and 2, you really don't have any savings account to handle your emergencies, because your threshold. So the first emergency you have, you automatically eat into your 10 and 2, which puts you below that. So, but I don't know if I have a concept of how much extra money you need to have. I do know that anytime that number is above over as $1 more than the 10 and 2, seems to be a proclivity to maybe using that money for whatever purposes are out there. But I 100% agree with you that doesn't allow us much security if we were to have another emergency. But what we did is we dove into our 10 and 2, used that money, we took the hit bond rating agency wise because of that, and our debt is more expensive now than what it would have been if we would have had a different savings account and not had to touch our 10 and 2 monies.
Yeah, thanks. And I guess just from the assembly perspective, there are policy calls to be made throughout whether or not we waive 10 and 2 requirements, which happened during COVID when we decided we were going to go ahead and continue to fund something. We can waive it per code. Additionally, we've made last year, I believe it was, or the year before, we made the policy call that we were confident in getting our FEMA reimbursement and we didn't have a solution to the building safety fund, that we went ahead and said, we're going to set those things aside for now. There was some fund balance for one-time expenditures. So I think there's a lot of different options within this conversation, but ultimately the savings account or the 10 and 2 is meant for expenditures in emergency situations. That's what it's there for. We'll go to Mr. Solt and then Mr. Gates.
Thanks. Appreciate it. Especially the 10 and 2 is mandatory, except for when it's not. So,
Well, it's mandatory to me when I'm looking at it because that's the rule I'm following, but I guess you guys can choose to do whatever you want.
my question, kind of like Mrs. Brawley's, the 10 and 2 has been around for a while. Is that the right number? You know, we've seen inflation go up. Do you have any thoughts on that?
I would have to get back to you, Mr. Sold. I would have to talk with Ross. That may just be standard industry. I'm not familiar that that's something that we set as an arbitrary amount. So let me check with Ross, but that might just be what is required from to get people to buy our bonds, that from like an industry standard kind of a thing. That would be my guess, but I will talk to him about that and see it. But I find it unlikely that we just pick those numbers out of the air.
Mr. Gates.
Oh, thank you. Yeah, I just wanted to clarify for the 10 and 2 policy. I think that in code refers to establishing the policy, but it's actually established by a resolution proposed by the CFO and approved by the Assembly. And our last one was a 2019 resolution, I think. I mean, is that correct? I just want to make sure that it's not actually saying in code it's 10 and 2 established by resolution.
I do not know. That's prior to me. We can absolutely get back to find out where the 10 and 2 came from if there's a desire to be able to do that.
Find the resolution.
But I am positive that it was approved by the Assembly. One way or the other, it was approved by the Assembly at that point in time. But I'm sure there was a lot of analysis and discussion that went into that particular thing. And as I stated, it makes a lot of sense. We want people to buy our bonds and give us good rates, and we want to be seen as a very rock solid, we're going to pay our debt kind of a thing. And if we have no savings account and an emergency happens, that's not going to give a lot of faith to those bond buyers out there. So I'm sure that that's the rationale used to do that and set that money aside, because that is almost an assurance that if we do have an emergency or we run negative in our budget for a year, that we can still make our debt payments back to them, because they know we had this significant savings account that we on an annual basis we could dip into to make those payments, and that's what it's for in the first place.
Thank you. Mr. Cross.
Yeah, I was just going to say that's just logical. Bond is just fractionalized debt, and so we're essentially taking out a loan, and And any kind of loan, particularly for any kind of capital improvements, if we're indebting for that, you got to require for reserves, meaning, and that's what that is. That's your capital reserve fund, bond rating fund. Just like a commercial loan, you're going to be required, they're going to factor in for vacancy factors, reserves, CapEx, and then management. What does that look like? Because without any kind of savings, without any kind of buffer in there, the only way that you can pay for, the only way you can pay for those things is to go in debt on your debt. Does that make sense? Like if you don't have the money, then you're just going to have to go further in debt in order to pay the obligations of your debt. And that's the spiral they don't want to see. That is real close to touching the third rail of business failure when you're taking out additional loans to pay your additional loans. And
We
so-
got pretty close last year. 21, we were with 11 million left. You know, we were getting down there, but I am confident that we're past that. So
Yeah, and-
we're not going to be in that situation this year or next year.
given the unique circumstances of the COVID response and dealing with that for the first time, I'm glad we're through that and we won't have to repeat those. So thank you.
Thank you. All right. Any other questions, particularly about how fund balance may interact with what we're working on for the 24 budget? Anyone on the phone? Not seeing anyone. All right. Well, we'll give you back some of your time. And I want to note that the next work session, the confirmation hearing, has been postponed. So this is it for today. So have a great afternoon. Thanks, Mr. Thurn.
All right.